Well, hi, friends. Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast. I'm Kim Skorupski, looking at Dr. Darrell G. Kirch. Good morning, Darrell. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you.
It's so lovely to see your smiling face. I still remember being at Learn, Serve, Lead and the AAMC group on faculty affairs and watching you just kind of walk in and grab a beer and sit down with everybody and just shoot the breeze. And you are always so real and authentic. And I just love that about you. And I always admired your leadership style. So friends, you know Dr. Darrell Kirch as the President and CEO of the Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC, for 13 years from 2006 to 2019. Dr. Darrell Kirch is an educator, a biomedical scientist, a clinical neuroscientist. He's a clinician, a psychiatrist. His journey took him from being faculty member, of course, investigator clinician, to a dean, to a university senior vice president, a leader of an academic health system, the Medical College of Georgia, Penn State, Hershey Medical Center, right through the AAMC, co-chair the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, the LCME, the Council of Deans. I'm sure I'm missing out other leadership roles. I think he invented sourdough bread. I don't know. I think you've done everything, Darrell. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. And folks, Dr. Kirch, this is a reunion episode because Dr. Kirch's first episode was, again, I think I mentioned April 2019, more years ago, and where he talked about his mentor having kicked him out of the nest because he recognized Darrell's ability to build teams. And then the future was written, and here he is with us. And we're just going to hear about what you've been up to, Dr. Kirch.
It was so interesting for me to think back to that first episode we did together, because that was a mere 4 months before I stepped out of my role at the AAMC. It was 9 months before we descended into the global trauma of COVID. I'd like to believe I was prescient and knew COVID was coming and wanted to head to my home in the Colorado Rockies. I was simply ready for a transition. And, at that point, when I was thinking about what I would be doing, people gave me no shortage of good advice about how to handle the transition from being a full-time academic physician to what came next. And two things that really stuck with me was one of my colleagues who I still see. In fact, I met at a board meeting just recently and reconnected. He said you shouldn't call it retirement. What it is preferment. And it's this phase of life where you actually get to do only things that you prefer to do. You can trim away the things that may be less gratifying, feel a bit more tedious, and just focus on the things that will fill your preferment. That was fabulous advice.
Love it.
And another person who had gone through the same transition recommended a book. I apologize, I can't recall the author's name, but the book was titled Portfolio Life. And it wasn't written specifically for academicians or faculty members, but it was written for people who've had fairly high pressure jobs. And it talked about how you construct the activities you do in this next phase, the same way you would construct, hopefully, an investment portfolio, where you diversify your activities in a way that gives you the highest yield. Now, we're not talking about financial yield. We're talking about the satisfaction one can have at this phase of life. And so I set about putting my portfolio together. And while COVID certainly was disruptive for me, as it was for everybody else, I found a portfolio that consists of The general categories are some boards, not-for-profit organization boards, about which I feel very passionate. I also do some individual advisory work to a handful of academic medical center leaders. And I work with actually an academic health consulting group, which will pull me in for very interesting projects, including some thought pieces that they do. So I have this wonderful portfolio now that is yielding tremendous gratification, but leaves me plenty of time for another category of my portfolio, which includes enjoying my home in the Colorado Rockies, fly fishing, hiking, cycling in the winter, snow skiing, cross-country skiing. I'm a very fortunate person to have had the opportunity to construct that kind of portfolio for these later years of life.
Oh, Darrell, this is so lovely to hear this. I really, really like that term preferment over retirement because it symbolizes the proactive taking ownership of it's not something happening to you, rather you are actively deciding what that looks like. And it doesn't sound to me like you've slowed down much by mention of the nonprofits, the board meetings, the advisory, the consulting. And when you said portfolio life, I looked it up. I think this is the book, The Portfolio Life: How to Future-Proof Your Career, Avoid Burnout, and Build a Life Bigger Than Your Business Card. Does that sound right?
I think that's it.
Christina Wallace.
That may very well be it. The concept,
Yeah.
the concept certainly matches.
Yeah, so I think that sounds wonderful. And you're reminding me of a talk I gave in Chicago where, you're exactly right, this idea of a portfolio where we're always taught to, or at least guided when we grow up and get our first job, to invest in a financial portfolio. Where are your investments? How will your institution contribute to your 401k or your 403b? So we think about portfolios as finances and economic security, and we sometimes neglect the social portfolio. And just as we want to diversify our holdings and our financial portfolios, I think many of us in academia, and I'm guessing someone at your level, we don't necessarily have a very diverse social portfolio because everyone I talk to, their sole identity or their master identity, their master status is clinician, scientist, investigator, leader. And it's hard to envision anything else because it's all consuming this identity of being an academic. So I'm curious if you can help us understand that transition, because you've spelled out a bunch of roles that sound like they keep you intellectually engaged, and they certainly fill your heart because you're clearly an expert and passionate about this work. But how do you get in that fly fishing and the hiking and the biking and the camping? What does that pie look like? Can you show us, help us understand the proportion of those things? Was it difficult getting into the social stuff?
It was not that difficult for me because early on, even before we were talking so actively about burnout, I had a sense of the risk involved in becoming burned out. And I developed the discipline of planning vacations a year in advance and knowing those times were absolutely guarded, sacred, could not be bumped. And rarely were they bumped. Even as a medical school dean or at the AAMC, if you plan ahead, you can protect those times. And for me, I didn't spend those times working on manuscripts or preparing talks. I would do something that was totally different, but that filled my soul. For me, again, that was getting time out in the Rockies, enjoying the activities, but also enjoying a bit of solitude. Often we need just some very private and quiet time to recharge our batteries. The other thing I would do is exercise, putting it on the calendar as if it's another meeting that you cannot bump. And so developing that discipline of really trying to carve out not a great deal of time, but enough time that I felt I could recharge my batteries. Now, obviously, as I approached preferment rather than retirement, uh, I started doing that even more consciously. I had finally had the time, but I also knew that I wanted to stay connected, and that's why the role of adjunct faculty can be so gratifying. So one of the things I should have mentioned is I'm an adjunct faculty member in the department of a dear friend and colleague at Stanford, the psychiatry department there. And just having that perch, having that connection, having occasion to travel there and spend a day talking with faculty who are just want to have a conversation with a new person who might help them think through some things in their career, meeting with a group of residents. So I took time, and I didn't try to fill my life again with 80 hours of work a week. I tried to fill my life gradually with things that I knew I would enjoy, and an opportunity to work with people that I knew I would value. So it requires thoughtfulness, but I think for a lot of faculty in the latter stages of career, they actually have a fear that they're being put out to pasture.
Yes. Yes.
And that is very disconcerting. I encountered situations where, for instance, someone who had served as a department chair and had the authority and responsibility of that position and had come to the point where they knew it was time to step back, but they really struggled with setting that old identity aside and developing a new one. But the great thing about our degrees, our MDs, our PhDs, our master's degrees, is they don't get canceled. We still have them. We still have all of the intellectual gratification and wisdom, hopefully, that comes along with that. And it allows one to enter a phase where you can be more generative, where you can find ways to give back. That can include volunteer work. There's a wonderful food bank program here in my mountain valley. It's one of the most gratifying things I've done is volunteered distributing groceries because there are so many people suffering from food insecurity. So we never have to give up the identity, the hard-earned identity that's reflected in our CV, but we also can do things that aren't traditional CV activities that may be even more gratifying.
I love that, Dr. Kirch. I love that you're being so forthright with that feeling that some faculty are felt like they are become marginalized in our later career or no longer relevant and don't have any impact anymore. And I've seen that as well, and it is heartbreaking, and it's a great reminder to us that maybe being canceled from certain positions or opportunities, we can't cancel what's in our brain and what we learned in our CV. They don't cancel that. So that's still it's a great reminder that is always a part of us. What have you been delighted by or surprised by? Has anything, because you sound the way you've described this is very, as you said, thoughtful. You said this, so you were clearly mindful, strategic, deliberate. It sounds like you, even when you were working, you were very protective of making those vacation times sacrosanct and not going to let that slip out of your hands. What has anything now, though, surprised you or delighted you or saddened you in this stage, this past 5 or so years?
Well, I have to say it was certainly not delightful, but it was quite an experience to have my transition from the AAMC coincide with the COVID outbreak. I was in no way prescient, but I stopped my full-time work just 5 months before we all started being isolated and cut off from the rest of the world. So that was a terrible surprise to have that occur. That said, it was an example of just because of the burden placed on the healthcare system, placed on our academic health centers, many of which were just at the very front lines of this battle. It was gratifying to see the way health professionals stepped up. It was equally concerning, though, to see the toll it took emotionally on health professions and on the entire country. So as a psychiatrist, I view this as a global traumatic event that has left us all collectively with PTSD. And in particular, I think people working in the realm of academic medicine and healthcare were traumatized by the experience. What I've also seen is our resilience, which is such an important quality that I think people who come to academic medicine, to the healthcare professions, to science and medicine have enormous resilience. And that resilience I've seen as we have come out of COVID and built back I think in a lot of ways, to paraphrase the current president, built back better. One of the things I'm most gratified by and most passionate about now is the ongoing work I'm doing as co-chair of the National Collaborative on Clinician Wellbeing, which is being run by the National Academy of Medicine. And we had started that effort in 2017 in the aftermath of some terrible resident suicides and a lot of publicity that surrounded them. And it raised our awareness of the heavy toll that burnout was taking in the health professions, and especially for physicians. And when the National Academy, in a series of discussions I had with Victor Zhao, the president, agreed to take on clinician well-being as a major initiative, I had no idea that we would have this exacerbation of the trauma of COVID, the demonstrated increase in burnout, the toll it took on physicians. Many of us remember the story of Lorna Breen, of Columbia faculty member who sadly took her own life as she was on the front lines as an emergency physician. It was burnout and the short path that exists from burnout to depression, suicide, worse. This crisis, I think, gave us a chance to focus even more on our well-being. And so I had no idea a pandemic was coming. My initial thoughts were that perhaps the pandemic would cause everybody to forget about clinician well-being, to forget about burnout among faculty members. In fact, it brought it to the fore. And I think it's given us even more energy as institutions increasingly really focus very intentionally on burnout and ways to improve it. throughout the faculty.
Yeah. Darrell, where through your work and all the boards and the service and the National Academy of Medicine and your consulting, how are you seeing this phenomenon of the burnout and well-being and wellness and recruiting future scientists and physician investigators? How are you seeing this play out when you look at the micro level, the person level, through the meso level, department, division, department, macro level, a school, an institution, when we're trying to balance with funds flow, compensation plans, increasing footprints? How do you see this competing interests, if you will, or those tensions between an institution trying to be viable, financially viable in healthcare, trying to balance that with human beings having to do the work? Are you seeing any space there for some kind of compromise to meet both those needs and those tensions? Are you noticing anything?
The short answer, and I'll expand on this, the short answer is yes. I see encouraging signs. The longer answer is it's happening more slowly than any of us would like. But let me expand on that a bit. I think that I'm coming up in just, let's see, 3 years. It will be the 50th anniversary of my graduation from medical school. And I think about those 5 decades, and what I'm struck by as I think back on them is we've always viewed ourselves as under stress, being pushed to the limit. There were always these environmental threats that seemed to be disrupting us. We never had the predictability that we would have loved to have. But this is where the resilience, the inherent resilience of the people in academic medicine really shines through. We find a way. And we sometimes it happens much later than we wished, but we make changes that help us adapt. I'll just pick one facet of the pressures on people. We had this traditional notion of everybody just devoting full time, which from other people would be double time, devoting full time to their academic medicine career and not leaving much space for anything else. Slowly but surely, I think we've really accepted the fact that work-life balance is a real thing.
Right.
Pardon me. That if we don't allow for some work-life balance, people cannot maintain that inherent resilience that they bring to their careers in medicine and science. The notion of accepting part-time faculty roles, that's been a heavy slog, and there's been enormous resistance to it, especially from, in many cases, from the larger university, which doesn't see that as an acceptable role. The adaptation of promotion and tenure tracks to accommodate the realities of life. Right. Stopping the clock and issues like that.
Yeah.
So I think we are inherently resilient people working in systems that are adaptable. It's just unfortunate that sometimes that adaptation takes longer than we'd like.
Yeah, you're helping me to remember that the work my colleagues and I have been doing in later career faculty as caregivers. So the other end of the age continuum. So we certainly know that in early career, mid-career, young families with childcare and that push-pull of trying to balance and have some kind of integration of a life with children. And then the opposite end of the spectrum, where many of us in later career, middle career and later career, We're taking care of our moms, our dads, our aunts and uncles. And it's not like Little House on the Prairie where they live a block away from us. Most of our faculty members, by virtue of this industry, relatives live around the country, let alone around the world. And so it's not so easy to scoot by mom and dad's place after work and share a cup of coffee or a bowl of soup, and our partners and our loved ones having health problems, or we're having health problems. So that, I think, has really been something that, I noticed was not attended to, the idea of our mid and later career faculty members who we don't oftentimes have good policies or programs or resources for them. So I appreciate your noticing that resilience, is inherent resilience. It's just by nature, people who go into this field, they will find a way. They are put here in this earth because they have a passion and a gift for giving. And it's also, I think, incumbent upon the organizations to recognize the limitations of human beings and those priorities of being a human being, of being moms and dads and sons and daughters, that you can't ask us to choose, discreetly between you're either going to be a physician or a scientist or a physician scientist or an educator, or you're not. It's not possible. So I get the resilience, and I'm also looking for, where and when will institutions find a spot where it's like, okay, this is, I don't want to say, we don't make money. We're obviously not, for profits, but I'm just seeing faculty members being more and more squeezed. But you're pointing out after your 5 decades in this space that's kind of just the way the status, that's just the human nature, and I'm reflecting on some of those times you read these pieces, these articles of kids these days are blah, blah, blah. And gosh, when these kids don't have any appreciation, you think that's true. But then you realize that somebody wrote that like 100 years ago, or, you read those stories, you're like, we've always been complaining about the same thing, no matter what. So it's just the nature of the beast, as a psychiatrist now, maybe it's kind of getting more afield in there, but.
A colleague who I've known for many years and is known to many faculty affairs people, Dr. Kevin Grigsby.
He's been on the podcast 2 or 3 times. Love Kevin.
He has a phrase that just has always stuck with me, that we're too prone to talk about a fondly remembered past that never really occurred.
Revisionist history, back in the good old days.
That said, though, I think one trend that is going to be integral to having a workplace in which people can flourish is actually the way in which medicine and academic medicine are having more and more women in leadership roles. I think historically, and I'm trying to avoid stereotyping here, but in my experience, women are often more sensitive to the full range of issues that people balance. Yeah. And that in becoming leaders, as more and more women break the glass ceiling, and we have more and more women who are chairs, deans, university presidents, I'm seeing a general increased sensitivity, and not just in them, in their male counterparts, an increased sensitivity to this issue. We simply cannot treat people like widgets.
Yeah.
We're right. Human beings.
You're right.
And we have to acknowledge the real needs and aspirations of human beings. So I just believe that yes, the world changes, our culture shifts, demographics change, but as resilient and very bright people in academic medicine, we will find ways to achieve this better balance and stay financially afloat.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a really optimistic, inspirational perspective, and I would expect nothing less from Dr. Darrell Kirch. You're right. You're right. Despite situations that seem dire, I think it's always important to remember there are things, it's a serenity prayer. There are certain things, right? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I don't say that to mean, well, just que sera, sera. That's out of my control. I can't do anything about it. Rather, the wisdom and discernment to get you through the times when you realize maybe this is something I can't change that, but what do I have control over to change this right now and maybe later? This idea that just keep going, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Dory and Finding Nemo, we just keep swimming. And we don't give up because that's what we do. We don't give up, and we will persevere, and we always do, right?
I think the work that's going on in academic medical centers about burnout is very encouraging to me. In less than a decade, we've gone from this simplistic notion that the way to combat burnout is just add a yoga session,
right?
That always gets bumped from your calendar.
Of course.
One of the best things I think that's come out of the National Academy of Medicine work on burnout is the identification that it is a system problem.
Right.
We're not here to fix the individual. It's what the system does to the individual. And it's been really impressive how sometimes things that seem like relatively small interventions, attending to a short staffing problem here, or offloading certain tasks to a person who, didn't need an MD to do the task, offloading that task to someone else. Really trying to, although this is proving a heavy lift, have the electronic health record become more user-friendly for the clinician and less just a tedious busy work tool. So fixing things like that can have an enormous positive impact on the overall well-being of the faculty member.
Yeah.
So we weren't having these discussions 10 years ago.
No.
That to me is a very encouraging sign.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to get too far afield here, and I don't want this to take too much more of your time, but in a couple minutes or so, off the cuff, what are your feelings about artificial intelligence in aiding work in academic health systems, and certainly, the negative sides of that? I'm thinking of when you said Epic, everybody's like, oh, Epic, it's going to solve problems. And now we see, anything done to excess can be harmful. An overdone strength can become a weakness. What are you hearing anything, or are you having any thoughts? Again, this is maybe not fair to you kind of throwing this at you, but we're of course it's so fast. AI is coming in hard and fast, and institutions are using it, and journals, as you know, are developing policies around acknowledging using it and where it's appropriate, inappropriate. And we hear stories of how it's helping the work and drafting work and coming up with things pretty quickly. What are your thoughts on it, or what have you seen that's kind of giving you pause?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in the field. I am struck, though, by the fact that it seems that every professional meeting now has content on artificial intelligence and its impact on our lives. Whatever the meeting, whatever the specialty or organization.
Yep.
And I think that virtually every new technology has created problems and has improved humans' abilities to be productive. There are these two sides of the coin and have been to almost every technology that's been introduced.
You're right. You're right.
I also think we've not noticed that artificial intelligence, some people prefer to call it assisted intelligence or augmented intelligence. We've had that in our hands for so many years in the form of our smartphones. And how many of us would give them up?
You can't. I wouldn't be able to call anybody. I don't know their phone numbers.
But so that's augmented intelligence that we really benefited from.
Right.
It's made things easier for us. AI more broadly and more deeply will do that for us, but there will be some threats involved. The world of disinformation that AI is now able to put on steroids is very, very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think at the end, it's just tremendously exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it could take so many of those tasks that create tedium in our lives and improve them.
Gosh.
Anything that will make our lives easier and in a sense make us smarter is a wonderful, wonderful advancement. But we will have bumps in the road, and we will have. I'm saying this as a digital immigrant, not a digital native, not having grown up in the digital world. Transitions can be hard,
right?
But I think it'll get us to a better place at the end of the day.
Gosh, can you imagine 50 years from now? It might be the way we practice medicine and the way we do science it'll be so different.
And hopefully much, much, much better.
And hopefully, right, we won't lose the human connection. Because I'm thinking of my mom when she got so mad when the grocery store went to self-checkout. You're going to put the cashiers out of their jobs, and I refuse to use those self-checkout lines. And she was furious. And then the last time I went to visit her before she passed, we had to run into Walmart and she scooted through that self-service. I said, Mom, what happened? Oh, it's just real quick. It's just much easier because the lines, they don't hire enough people. And it's so interesting to see how this evolves and how we can be early adopters, or later, but it will be definitely interesting. And hopefully we maintain that connection to humanity, that even if we're saving time and recognizing and appreciating efficiencies by using enhanced intelligence or augmented intelligence, at least that will free up some time to attend to our personhood and other people and relationships and identity and networks and diversifying our social portfolios. So I'd like to think that would be where we could then take that bank of the reservoir that we save and put it in an investment where that'll pay off dividends for our souls. And that could be, I guess, in the lab, in the clinic. But hopefully it's also family or on a trail, a hiking trail, or at a river stream, right?
It's interesting. Two of the activities that are in my portfolio now are serving on the board of the Gold Foundation, the organization that started the white coat ceremony and has expanded its efforts to promote humanism in healthcare. And another board is the Hastings Center for Bioethics, which, of course, right now has a lot of its scholarly work focused on the impact of artificial intelligence.
Oh, my.
So for me, what feels important now is, as technology advances, is that we not lose sight of the ethical foundations, the values that should always rest behind our work, and we don't lose sight of our humanity.
Exactly.
And the humanistic elements of medicine and science. So that's it's very personally very gratifying and fascinating to be working in these two efforts when a lot of people question whether they're threatened or not by these technologic changes and social changes and changes in the business of healthcare. My goal is to be one of the people working to ensure our humanistic foundations and our ethical foundations remain solid.
Dr. Darrell Kirch, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, your wisdom, your inspiration. You are definitely a role model for me and thousands of other people. And thank you so much for spending your time with us.
It is so nice to not only be part of the reunion of Faculty Factory, but to be an alumnus also.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Darrell, you're so kind. Thank you. See you next time on the Faculty Factory podcast, everybody.
Hello, Faculty Factory listeners. It's your podcast producer, Casey Callahan. Please make sure to download our newest free Faculty Factory book called The Academic Medicine Starter Kit, Timeless Tips and Guidance for Early Career Faculty Members. If you haven't already done so, it's available on the homepage, facultyfactory.org. In addition, I wanted to let you know that as of October 2024, this podcast that you're listening to has had nearly 90,000 total downloads and more than 15,000 total YouTube views. And the Faculty Factory website has drawn more than 50,000 web visits from users in 122 different countries. We would love to invite you to be a guest on the show or share the Faculty Factory website, podcast, and ebooks to someone you think would benefit from checking it out. If you want to reach us to be a guest or nominate someone in our academic medicine community who you think we need to hear from, please visit us on facultyfactory.org and drop us a message there in the Contact Us page.
Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more. Get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.